to make it accessible for the rest of the world to be able to experience that part of the world, and especially what the people locally are experiencing in terms of climate change. So we decided to create an interactive 360 video documentary on the web. By this time, there was no VR yet. I'm going to show you what we did, which was basically one of the first, I'd like to consider it the first, narrative 360-based experience on the web. I don't hear any sound. There we go. So you have to imagine, we went to the north.
The snow on the land is melting.
And we had no experience shooting 360 video. It was all new technology to us, and there were very few people who actually knew how to do this. And we went to one of the regions in the world which is hardest to actually shoot in, and then we took all this equipment with us, which was also a huge unknown for us. And how do you tell a story then in 360? Us coming from a background of traditional filmmaking, we wanted to blend a couple of different techniques of existing filmmaking and regular film and 360 video. Narrator, and we had subtitles, and it was really like it carried like a real film, but the difference was it was an immersive environment, and you could really look around in it. And one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to experiment with how do you create a closeness in this film, in this documentary. How do you create a relationship with your protagonists? Because in 360 you can look around and around, but how do you, for instance, get close to a subject? There's no intimacy in 360 video, which is a problem. So we came up with this. Right now, I'm not doing anything. It takes over control, and we have a seamless transition from 360 into flat film. Now you have a beautiful close-up with the field of depth. You have even archival material that you can weave into your story. And now we're back into our 360 environment again. So when we first created this form of what we call switching, is the going back and forth between projection modes of flat film and 360, we were worried that the audience might be confused or frustrated, that all of a sudden you lose control and you're in this cordoned off area, and then all of a sudden you gain control again. But we found out through a lot of user testing that people actually found it very natural after having seen it twice, and they just enjoyed it. They understood this language, and they actually really enjoyed it because they like the immersiveness and the sort of the active looking around in the 360 environments, but they also like to sit back and lean back to passively ingest and observe the flat film content. So what we did here was establish a new form of storytelling, and this is really a part of a new vocabulary that we like to use in telling stories in 360 video. We actually also shot the Northern Lights in 360, which is obviously, we did this and composited it in post-production. So this was kind of our introduction into the whole 360 business. And then came the Oculus. We were very curious what we could do with this. Can we put our material in the Oculus Rift? What does it do? And by surprise, we actually noticed that it was very successful. People actually loved watching these environments in 360 VR. I'm going to show you a little video that was taken. These are audience reactions from people who we just tested the first footage with on the DK1. And I want to show you the reactions. I'm sure you have seen many of these kind of things, but just want to point it out for... We're going to say a couple of very important things. That's beautiful.
Wow. My knees are a little weak. Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. That was intense. When it first started, it hit me, and I had to, get my balance, and suddenly you're not in the room anymore. It takes you somewhere else.
There's so much going on. Like one time I was busy looking at the glaciers, and then I turned around. I was like, oh, there's a ship behind me. That was pretty cool. Waha! And I do sometimes feel like I'm falling.
I can just look around and spin around, and I can see everything in the area, and it just feels really immersive.
Visually and auditorily, everything, you're there. And your brain totally believes it.
This is like the holodeck in a way, but really in a way I would never have imagined, but here it is.
So what he's saying is this is like the holodeck. It's like being here. What it illustrates is that people all of a sudden they think that their body should be in VR, and they expect it to be there because they feel they are in these places rather than looking at them. It's breaking down. VR is breaking down the fourth wall, and it has a very different relationship to us. The footage that what you're looking at is all of a sudden becoming part of your universe, and it overrides your senses. And this is just to illustrate that what kind of effect VR has on people. And in traditional film, you have what is called the suspension of disbelief, which is that your brain looks at a sequence of images and it puts it together in your head, and that is what you are willing to believe as real. In VR, it's quite the opposite. Your brain subconsciously already accepts what it sees as real. But rationally, you're trying to tell yourself it's not real. I'm not really standing here, but your brain overrides that. And you can't really tell yourself that you're not really here, because when people see somebody in VR, very often they're waving at them. And of course they know that they're not really there, but that's what the kind of reactions are in VR. And then came, of course, the more consumer headsets and cardboards that made this into a more mass consumer product. I don't have to say much about this, but... And then YouTube and Facebook joined as well with their 360 video players. But what does this mean for storytelling? How do we tell a story in VR? Because you can't really apply the same rules to storytelling in VR as you do to traditional film. Now, in traditional film, we know what works and what doesn't work. But in VR, we kind of have to figure it all out again. Now I want to show you a funny experiment in film, a bold experiment that kind of relates to VR.
My name is Marlowe, Philip Marlowe. Occupation, private detective. You know, somebody says, follow that guy. So I follow him. Somebody says, find that female. So I find her. But some cases, like this one, kind of creep up on you on their hands and knees. And the first thing you know, you're in it up to your neck. Right now, you're reading in your newspapers and hearing over your radios about a murder. They call it The Case of the Lady in the Lake. It's a good title. It fits. What you've read and what you've heard is one thing. The real thing is something else. There's only one guy who knows that. I know it. This Lady in the Lake business started just 3 days before Christmas. Who invited you?
I did.
Now, wait a minute, Mr. Marlowe.
Just when I was beginning to like you.
Well, you want the facts, don't you?
When it concerns a woman, does anybody ever really want the facts? Vain female, aren't you?
Please don't be so difficult to get along with. I need help.
What's going on here?
He got cute.
Striking an officer, resisting arrest, and murder, all on Christmas Eve. Let's wrap you up real pretty, shall we? And take you right down to headquarters. Give me your hand.
So what this shows actually is that, it's been done a couple of times, this form of storytelling, where you have a first person and you're actually taking part of the story yourself as a viewer. It actually doesn't work. It wasn't successful and was hardly ever done after. Now, why is that? It's because when you're becoming part of the story, you're so close to the subject that you're actually not able to project your emotions on it. So there is an emotional distance. And that emotional distance that you don't have in regular film, where there is a distance between you and the characters, it's easier to actually project your feelings onto them. This is kind of an irony. Now, I'd like to play a little clip, an interview of Alfred Hitchcock, who also has to say something about what works and creates meaning in storytelling in film.
Now, the third way is what one might call pure cinematics, the assembly of film, and how it can be changed to create a different idea. Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees. And he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
Or you for it, as it were.
So this is a very important illustration of why film works, because you have the power of the cut, which creates juxtaposition, and by combining different scenes, different shots, we create meaning in our head, and this is what is called magical symbolic thinking. Now, we can apply that in regular film, but how does that work for VR? We can't cut the way that you can cut in in regular film. You can't condense time and space in the way that you can do it as illustrated. Now, therefore, we, as software developers, we created something to help bring back a little bit of this control to the filmmaker, to create this focus of attention. And we call it forced perspective. Now, before I explain more about forced perspective, I'd like to show you a little trailer of a project that we recently did together with Jürgen Geertz from Freedom 360 and the Canadian Space Agency. This is just a short trailer. So this is a trailer for a 12-minute documentary that we created that basically takes a rig of cameras into space and creates, it turns a gondola into a 360 platform. Thank you very much, Jürgen, for your help on this, solving all the technical issues. But how did we tackle the storytelling approach of this documentary? Because we really wanted to tell a story. So one of the things that that you struggle with as a filmmaker is how do you direct the attention of the people, because you don't know where people are going to look in 360 video or VR. So for instance, this shot, I'm going to show you how there's going to be a cut between two shots, and I'm not controlling. This is just a simulation of how somebody might watch this footage. So that's nice. They're looking at the action. They're looking at what I want them to see. Now we cut to another shot, and this is what I wanted them to see. Great, they're looking in the right direction, and they may learn something about not tripping over lines when you're launching a balloon. Now, with regular 360 video players, we don't know where, after a cut, the user will end up looking. So you may have the problem that, for instance, here, they're looking at the balloon and then they get sidetracked. This is a very stupid user who obviously doesn't know where the story develops and starts looking at a stupid cart. Okay, look at the balloon, please. Why are you looking there? And now you have the cut, you're looking at the tarmac. You missed out on the action. Well, now go search where did this happen again? Okay, you're too late now. So that's a problem. We can try to line everything up in post-production before we publish our video, but we never really know where people are looking. So how do we direct our attention? That's why we developed forced perspective. Now we're watching the same piece of video with our dumb user. Let's see what happens on the cut. He's back into the action. So on the cut, we can reorient where the camera is looking. And this is just one way of bringing back control in the hands of the filmmaker. This forced perspective is a feature of our player. It's basically done on the player side. It's a live rendered action. So it doesn't matter how your footage looks. The player knows where to reorient the sphere so that on the next cut you're not missing out on what you want the user to see. So forced perspective is one thing. The other thing which I like you to see is how we work with titles. For instance, how do you place your subtitles or any kind of titles you want to put in 360? People usually burn them into the footage and they put them in 4 quadrants just to hope that people will be able to read them then. And they'll look warped and skewed. But this is what Liquid Cinema can do for you. Now we look over at this gentleman, and boom, his title comes up. Now this title only came up because I was looking at him. And this title is a different layer from the video, and it's projected programmatically on top of him. It will only come up when I look at him. So I will always see it in a very fluent way, as if it was part of the film, as if I'm watching a film. It's not a random thing, it's all gaze controlled. So next time I watch this piece of footage, maybe I will be 5 seconds later when I look at him, or a little bit earlier, but the title will fade in exactly like that, how I want it, and it can be either you can pin it to the sphere, pin to sphere as we call, where that means that if you look around it stays on him, or pin to gaze, meaning that if you look around, the title can still be projected on top of the on the video, but it doesn't move with the video. Another reason, or another way why forced perspective might be important, is if you want to use, for instance, depth of field in 360, and you have something that is in focus, and other parts that are out of focus. I'm just going to show you a little part of our trailer. Here we go. background is all out of focus and the foreground was in focus. So you want to make sure that when you're coming in on this shot, you're seeing the bees, actually. So that's another way how you can really isolate one thing that you want to be the first and primary interest of the what you're using is looking at, and then you can look around, but they then at least understand your shot. Another shot that I always like showing is where is it? Here we go. This is another instance where forced perspective is really important. See, in this shot, I would have missed this football if I didn't have forced perspective. These are just some of the awesome details that you can show with forced perspective. I'm gonna go back. So we found out that there are actually no players out there that can do this stuff, like also the switching from flat film to 360 that I showed you in the beginning with the man in the close-up. So we decided to develop our own software, Liquid Cinema. Now, Liquid Cinema is a suite of players and white label SDKs for iOS, Android, web, Gear VR, and more coming in the future, more platforms, that comes together with an authoring tool with which you can build these kind of experiences. And it was developed in collaboration, participation of the Canada Media Fund, Arte, and BR, NDR, and the Research Institute in Germany, Fraunhofer. And this is what the interface of the authoring tool looks like. So this is, basically, it's an authoring tool. You use it after you've finished your cut. So you created your video, you created it in whatever editing program you're using, and then you've put your effects on, your After Effects, color correction. Then you import it into Liquid Cinema. And there you can specify what kind of events you want to happen when. And this is all based on frames. So in this case, what you see, the bottom part of it, it's actually the metadata that it pulls in from Premiere. So it understands, you can sync it with Premiere, and it understands live which parts, like where the cuts are on your timeline. So as you're editing in Premiere, it will actually live update your cuts here. And then you can specify, is this shot 360 projected? Is it a flat projection? Is it a still? Is it and it's all within one video file. And the forced perspective, for instance, that is something that you want to set at the beginning of a frame. So that's why it's important to have the start and end frames of every clip that is inside your edit. So it's not an editing tool, it's an authoring tool. You can also specify, for instance, hitboxes. Now you saw the title that was overlaid with the weatherman who's explaining something about the weather for the balloon. And that title is triggered by your gaze, meaning that there is an area of interest around him that if you pan your head towards him, it will trigger an overlay. Now in this case it triggered a title, but it could also trigger an audio clip, or it could even force something else to happen, and it could even trigger a pan, or basically it is not necessarily tied to one action or the other. And a gaze-controlled hitbox is always something that happens from frame X to frame Y. You can also set titles in this authoring tool. Now the reason why you want to have them separate from your video stream is because titles look much better if you have them live rendered as opposed to baked into your footage. You've all seen how the titles look when they're scrolling credits and they put them on 4 quadrants, or you have a title nice in the center, but hey, you were facing the wrong way, so the title is either not in your field of vision or it looks skewed. Now this authoring tool, which works with the players, can author the title to be independent of the video, so you can either make it behave that it is pinned to your gaze, so it will always be in front of you no matter where you look, or that the title sits on top of your footage, but at least it looks very crisp. And you can also adjust how the title behaves per different platform. Because in VR, titles appear different from on, for instance, a web browser or an iPhone. We want titles to look smaller in VR because otherwise usually they look way too big if you can't have one solution for all platforms. Now the authoring tool is smart enough to automatically already rescale things for different platforms, but also gives you the control to customize the placement per platform, placement and size. So here you see, above here you can select your different platforms that you're authoring for, and you custom place and size for each platform. And you can also import sprites, so make animations with GIFs or PNGs. And it authors for all platforms in one publish. So if you are finished with your project, you just publish to whatever platforms you have selected you want to push it to. And what it spits out is a metadata file, which contains all the information that the player understands how to read back your footage. This is another thing I'd like to show you, which is our heat map tool. I'm going to show you it live. So this is the heat map for what we just saw in this film.
Weather balloons travel all the way to the very
edge of space. And the red regions are basically showing the most, where the most gazes are, and with the transparent regions outside of the blue where no gazes are, or very few. This is basically gathering information from gazes 4 times a second from all users who are watching or having watched this video up until now. And you can specify also which platforms you want to look at it. Do you want to watch VR mode and non-VR mode? Do you want to look at iOS, Android, or web? And you can also control the opacity and how it appears on your footage. So it gives you a lot of control. Now it's showing it as an equirectangle, but you can also switch to 360 view.
Jürgen Geertz is a pioneer in creating systems that allow filming in all directions.
This really gives us a lot of feedback in terms of how people are watching your content. And sometimes we were afraid that they were missing out on certain actions because something was happening behind you. And this tool informed us that actually people were able to find out where to look. Like for instance here, if we cut to this scene of Thomas and Jürgen sitting in the boardroom, you see that starts all there. That's because of forced perspective, because everybody starts at the same center point. Then people wander over and start looking at him. So as you're making a film, it's actually really a useful tool to understand behavior of people, and in VR or not in VR.
Weather briefing announces whether tomorrow will be the day.
Another thing that Liquid Cinema does is it imports subtitles, so it reads SRT files and can do so from does multiple language support as well. Now the tool is scheduled to be released in approximately 6 weeks from now as a beta version, and we're looking into testing it with a lot of people. So if you're interested, let us know. And we've decided to actually make it available for free, with the based on the advice of. You have to thank Alexander Jenny for this, because it was his advice to us to make the tool available and the web player available for people for free. Because we want you as the content creators to go crazy and really make something with this. We want to provide you with the tools, the canvas and the brush to create your own painting. I think that the language of VR should be driven by storytellers and not by technology. We're here to support the storytellers. So that is what Liquid Cinema can do for you. We've launched the platform with Arte as the first broadcaster to really embrace 360 VR and adopt it as a new platform on which they're releasing content continuously. And many other broadcasters are following. We've sold it to BR, MDR, ZDF, and as I said, it's one platform that pushes to multiple platforms, and we're also in the works of creating it for Apple TV 4. Do I still have some time, or should I go to questions? Have time? Okay. So I just wanted to show you how this transition from flat to 360 works in VR, because you might think, well, it looks nice on a flat screen, but how does it really work in VR? I showed you that example at the beginning of the polar sea. Just to hold on. I'm just going to show it to you once more. So this is a simulation of somebody looking around, and when it stops and there we go. That was a seamless transition. Now you can only do that when your player is frame accurate, which our player is, because it has to understand when it has to switch between projection modes. This is the example. We used a film of Werner Herzog to illustrate how this would work in VR. So we're in a virtual cinema. We can look around, and we have a regular film screening in front of us.
The painters of the cave seem to speak to us from a familiar yet distant universe. But what we are seeing here is part of millions of spatial points. Today, scientists have mapped every single millimeter of the cave using laser scanners. The position of every feature in the cave is known.
So it shows you how you can automatically direct people's attention to come back to that screen in front of you. So that's how an illustration, how it can be applied in VR. Are there any questions?
Yeah, can you show a few more transitions?
I can. Do you want the VR transition? I just have to go digging in my drive. Can I show you after this presentation? I don't want to waste people's time.
I have a question. With forced perspective, let's say the user is being really stupid, even more stupid than that one, and they're looking down and you change the view to straight ahead.
Yeah.
But they're still looking down. How do you
That's a
deal
very
with...
good question. In VR, exactly, you're still looking down because you can't really adjust the vertical, the horizon. So forced perspective always is forced on the horizontal axis, but not on the vertical axis in VR. It is, you can force it when on a flat screen mode, non-VR mode, I mean. But then again, it gives, Liquid Cinema Authoring Tool gives you the ability to choose whether you want to force horizontal and vertical both. You could enable or disable one of them, so you have that control. But by the way, most people who look down and then look up again, they don't look down and look up like this. They look down and look up there again, so they wouldn't miss out on the action.
Good point.
We're hearing a lot of talk about binaural sound. What about sound integration and spherical sound projection?
Oh, very good question. So we do support the spherical sound. We have 2 big ears integrated into Liquid Cinema. But we don't want to marry anybody to one particular sound engine or sound solution. So we will be supporting IRT and Singo as well in the future. And basically, if you have certain requests or you wanted to support certain sound solution, we can always, we're open to building that into the platform.
You spoke about importing PNG sequences.
Yep.
Can you talk more about the workflow of importing graphics in that sense?
The workflow of importing graphics. Well, it's really that you can click import a file and then you drag it onto your sphere. I can't speak to you on that technical level because I don't build the tool myself. So, but if you have, you can import sprite sheets. And they have technical limitations depending on what device or platform you're building for, because of the limitations of the device. Sometimes, the resolution has to be a certain maximum per platform.
How about social media, such as like YouTube or Facebook, or have any of them expressed an interest in licensing your technology or something for integrating it in their players?
We do have interest from some bigger platforms. I'm, however, not sure whether I can release that information to you at this point because we're still in negotiation. But indeed. I do think though that, for instance, forced perspective is something there to stay. It's really part of the VR vocabulary that everybody should be able to use. And I think that all players in the future should and will incorporate forced perspective because it's such a no-brainer.
So I saw this at NAB, but I still had another question I was kind of unclear about. I know that you can trigger like graphics or titles depending on where the user's looking. Could you also maybe jump to a different clip or segment in the timeline and kind of change the path of the story based on what the user's doing as well?
Mm-hmm. Good question. Right now, the authoring tool, the way it's being built, not yet. We do know that people have this request, and what you're talking about is kind of like a non-linear or an interactive narrative, because you are changing the narrative and the linearity of the experience based on your action. This is definitely something that we want to work into the tool. What you can do, however, is change the gaze, change the sphere based on your gaze. So for instance, if somebody is watching something like an orchestra playing and they're looking at one direction for more than, I don't know, 15 seconds or so, we think like, okay, you should really look at that angle. We can cut, boom, to the other angle, but only because they were looking that way for so long. So you can do all these time-based actions and gaze-controlled actions.
Thank you. So generally, viewer feel vexation when the viewer moving conflicts to the forced movie. So how do you have something the treat of the treat for vexation, prevent of vexation?
So I don't know. I can't understand what you're.
So when you viewer want to right or left, so the viewer on the other hand the player is move opposite. So
I'm not sure if I understand. Sorry.
Let me see if I can try and paraphrase. Is there an issue with if the viewer is looking one way, but the forced perspective is taking the other way? I guess perceived shift of motion.
No, because it's on the frame.
So
it's a hard cut. You don't know it. You don't realize it as a user. So people who are watching these films, they actually are like, well, what technology? What are you talking about? Like, I don't see anything. No, you're not seeing it because it's invisible. It doesn't interfere with you watching the content. However, you could, if you wanted to, make a tween. So you could force a perspective over one way or another, but you'd rather not want to do that in VR because you don't want to make people sick. But it is possible.
Quick question for the forced perspective. In this shot where the dumb user was staring at the bucket,
yeah.
If they're staring down, and if you could look over here, when they're staring down and then you force them to look straight ahead, now they're looking horizontally, but their head is still down. So now if they look sideways, you know what I mean? It would kind of mess up the orientation. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier, is that in VR you would not adjust the vertical axis. Like you would not adjust the vertical. So if you're looking down, you're always looking down.
Right, okay, I must have missed that. So then when you force the perspective, they'd just be looking at the ground at that point.
I guess the idea is that if there's a sudden cut, then somebody would probably look up.
Yeah.
I think I would.
Yeah.
Could you tell me you recommend good high quality VR? The other one?
High quality
cinematic VR?
The experiences or?
Cinematic VR, your favorite? Could you tell me?
You mean the content pieces? If I could give an example, or
Yeah, content.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
your
favorite
favorite
one. I saw. Edge of Space. I would definitely watch if I were you. That is a narrative in VR. I really like Notes on Blindness, which is very. I don't know. Have you heard of it? It's a VR experience which makes you experience what it is like to be blind, but then it kind of visualizes what that person internally sort of projects in their mind based on the sounds. So you're really into the body of that person and the experience of a person who is blind, and I think it's a beautiful application of VR, and it's also very well executed. So Notes on Blindness. It had nothing to do with this project, by the way. The Notes on Blindness? It will become available on the Artist 360 platform, which is you can download on your iPhone or Android phone for free if you search for Arte 360 VR in the App Store or Google Play Store. I'm trying to find...
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I think that's a fantastic way to end the day.